They say Caleb Thornfield is a ghost who lives in the moor, a man who was dead inside 15 years ago. Just not buried. But on that fateful night, when the clouds were dark and the sky was angry, fate forced him out of the loneliness he held as tightly as an unclosed coffin. The wind howled like a demon, rattling the windows and tearing pieces of tin off the roof like the claws of a hungry beast. The rain didn't fall. It poured down like whips on flesh. On the porch, Caleb stood as still as stone, squinting through the biting water. The stable door was wide open. That can't happen. Caleb Thornfield might forget the day, forget how to talk to people, but he never forgot to close the stable door. In his world, everything was routine. Pull the coals from the stove, check the reins, bolt the stable. It wasn't a routine. It was survival. Damn, Caleb muttered, pulling on his frayed coat and reaching for the oil lamps. With every step he took through the muddy yard, raindrops splashed on his calves like cold fire. The oil lamp swayed in the wind, its weak light breaking in the rain as if the darkness itself were fighting back. And then amidst the roar of thunder, he heard something he shouldn't have. Voice, whispers of fear, trembling and unfamiliar. As a woman, Caleb paused, his hand instinctively closed around the Winchester slung across his back. No one came to this part of town, no one. The nearest town was a day's ride away, and most of the people who lived there avoided Caleb like he was the plague. The hermit was a crazy man, they said, and he didn't like strangers. He pushed open the cage door. The flickering light swept through the darkness, then froze. 12 girls, eyes wide open like fawns in fear, their skirts stained with rain and wind, their bodies shivering, huddled in the straw, like little birds knocked from their nests by a storm. They were strangely alike: black hair, high cheekbones, eyes as deep as night. Sister, blood. The eldest girl stepped forward, standing in front of her siblings. The wind blew her hair across her face, but her chin was held high. Fire and fear mingled in her eyes like embers that had not yet been extinguished. Please, she said softly, her voice shaking like rain. We don't steal. We just need a roof over our heads. Caleb said nothing. Just watched them silently. His eyes took in every bruise peeking out from under their sleeves, every face gaunt with hunger. And what he knew most, the empty gaze of someone who had lost everything. What are you running away from? He asked, his voice hoarse like a whetstone, not at all gentle. A moment of hesitation appeared in the eldest sister's eyes. Then she softly replied, as if admitting something that should not be said in the world. Our Father. And then, as if heaven and earth were in unison, a bolt of lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the stable like daylight. In that split second, Caleb saw it clearly. Despair, not the fleeting kind. Deep-seated fear. He'd seen it before, in mirrors, for 15 years. But what drove a dozen daughters to flee from their own father in the middle of a deadly storm? And why did the eldest sister keep staring out into the street as if waiting for something worse than thunder to strike her grandfather's door? The eldest sister's hands trembled as she brushed her wet hair away from her face. I'm Grace, she said, her voice steady. These are my sisters. Caleb's eyes scanned the group, taking in details that made his jaw clench. Bruises on their arms were half hidden under long sleeves, and sunken cheeks showed that they had missed too many meals. And something else, a weariness deeper than mere fear. Grace, he repeated, the name sounding strange on his tongue. He hasn't spoken to anyone for months. What is your father's name? Pastor Jeremiah Blackwood. The name popped out like poison. He runs the church in Millbrook Valley. Caleb knew that name. Everyone within 100 miles knew that name. Blackwood expanded his influence over the years, building churches and gathering followers the way other men raised cattle. But Caleb never paid attention to the rumors that followed the pastor. He will come for us, Grace continued, her voice fading to a whisper. He will never stop searching. A younger sister, about 16, with deep black eyes but softer features, stepped forward. Tell him about the marriages, Grace. Tell him what Father made us do. Grace's face hardened. Martha, no, he needs to know. Martha's voice broke in despair. My father sold us. He called it holy matrimony. But he sold us to the highest bidder. Men pay to have wives they can control. The barn fell silent, save for the howling storm outside. Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had heard whispers of such things in the territories. Those who use religion to cover up cruelty. But when I saw the living proof right in front of me, trembling and afraid, those whispers became real. Our three sisters, Grace couldn't finish her sentence. We can't let him do that to our little brothers. We couldn't let him sell Martha to an old man who had 2 wives buried in his yard. Caleb tightened his grip on the rifle. During his years of solitude, he convinced himself that the cruelties of the world were no longer his concern. He fought his wars, lost his battles, and won his solitude. But as he looked at these girls, these children, something stirred in his chest, something he thought had died. You are safe here, he heard himself say, at least tonight. Grace's eyes searched his face. You don't understand. When Father finds us, and he will find us, he won't come alone. He has men who obey him without question, men who believe that his word is the word of God. Thunder rumbled overhead, and in the distance, barely audible amid the storm, was the sound Caleb had feared. The sound of horses' hooves. Several horses were galloping across the wet ground, heading straight for his farm. Grace's face paled. He's here. The youngest sister, a girl not yet 14 years old, began to cry. Others huddled together like lambs sensing wolves in the dark. Caleb walked to the barn window and looked out into the storm. Through the rain, he could see lights moving along the valley road. 3, perhaps 4 riders, lanterns swinging as they urged their horses to a gallop, despite the dangerous conditions. But what sent a shiver down his spine wasn't the number of knights, but the fact that they were riding toward his cabin in weather that would have made any sane man stay indoors. That determination comes from only one place: absolute certainty that God is with you, or that you are the devil, and the storm is just another tool to use against the weak. Caleb turned away from the window, his mind racing with possibilities. Hide them in the attic. Too obvious. Show them out the back door. They would never outrun these men on horseback in this storm. Listen, he said, his voice cutting through their panic. There is a vegetable cellar under the wooden floor in the far corner. It is hidden under bales of hay. Get down there and don't make any noise, no matter what you hear. Grace shook her head. He'll be looking everywhere. Dad doesn't give up when he wants something. Then we have to make sure he doesn't want to search too thoroughly. Caleb moved toward the barn entrance, checking his rifle. How well do you know your father's weaknesses? Weakness. Martha stepped forward, confusion replacing some of her fear. The father has no weaknesses. He said God protects him from doubt and failure. Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Every man has his weaknesses. Girl, even those who think they speak for God. The sound of horse hooves was getting closer. Through the storm, Caleb could hear voices shouting orders. Organized voices, military voices. That says something important about the kind of people Blackwood surrounded himself with. What is your father afraid of? Caleb urged. What makes him angry? What makes him doubt himself? Grace's eyes widened in understanding. Out of control. Father could not bear to have his authority questioned. When someone challenges him publicly, he becomes dangerous. Good. Caleb moved to help his younger sisters towards the secret bunker. And what about his reputation? How much does that mean to him? Everything, Martha whispered. The whole territory knows the name of Reverend Blackwood. He would rather die than let people think he was weak. The cellar door creaked open, revealing a dark, planked space. It was built to store grain, but tonight it will hide 12 lives. The sisters began to climb down one by one, their wet dresses rustling against the wooden ladder. Grace was the last to go down. She paused in the doorway, looking up at Caleb with something that might have been hope. Why are you helping us? He doesn't even know us. Caleb looked down at her, seeing something in her face that reminded him of another life, another time when he failed to protect someone important. Get down there, he said gruffly, and whatever happens, don't go out until I say it's safe. The hatch closed with a soft thud, Caleb spread hay across the entrance and went to extinguish half of the lanterns in the barn, leaving just enough light to look natural. He stood near the entrance, rifle ready, but not too conspicuous. Outside, the voices became clearer. 3 men, maybe 4. One voice rose above the others, deep, commanding, accustomed to being obeyed without question. Check every building. They came this way. 12 girls cannot disappear into thin air. Reverend Jeremiah Blackwood has arrived. Caleb took a deep breath and stepped out into the storm. It's time to face the man who calls himself a man of God. The man who rode up to Caleb's house looked exactly as he appeared. A man who uses the name of God to justify his lust for power. Tall, thin, with black hair that shined despite the rain, and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they saw. His black coat gave him the appearance of a priest, but his demeanor suggested something tougher, something military. 3 men accompanied him, all carrying rifles and wearing the looks of men who had done terrible things before and would do them again without hesitation. "Hello, brother," Blackwood called, his voice cutting through the storm with skill. "I am Reverend Jeremiah Blackwood. I'm looking for my daughters who ran away from home tonight. 12 young girls together. Have you seen them?" Caleb stepped out into the rain, his rifle hanging loosely in his hand. It was still there, but not as threatening. "Daughter." Caleb's voice was filled with disbelief. 12 people must keep you busy." Blackwood's smile was as cold as winter stone. "The Lord has blessed me with many children to lead into righteousness. They were young and foolish, lost in sinful thoughts. I need to get them home before they get into danger." In this storm, Caleb gestured toward the pouring rain. "It seems very dangerous to be out looking for anyone tonight. A father's duties do not end when the weather turns inclement." Blackwood dismounted, his boots kicking up mud. "I don't think we've been introduced. I know most of the God-fearing men in this territory. Caleb Thornfield. And I live a private life." "Ah, I've heard of you." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. The hermit lost his family and turned his back on civilization. Some say he has also turned his back on God. Something dangerous flashed in Caleb's chest. "Some people say a lot of things. Doesn't mean they are right." "Indeed." Blackwood stepped closer, studying Caleb's face in the lantern light. "But a man's character is revealed in times of trial. When faced with the choice between helping a father find his lost children or hiding runaways who have neglected their family duties, well, that's when we see what a man truly believes in." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Caleb had dealt with men like Blackwood before, men who cloaked their cruelty in righteous rhetoric and expected the world to bow to their supposed moral authority. "Your daughters," Caleb said slowly. "They all ran away at the same time. Must have been quite a heated family discussion." Blackwood's composure cracked for a moment. "They're influenced by outside forces, fed lies about their duties as daughters and future wives. But I will correct their thinking once they get home, where they belong." One of Blackwood's men fidgeted in his saddle. "Pastor, we should search the buildings. They could be hiding anywhere." "Of course." Blackwood's smile returned, cold and predatory. "Mr. Thornfield wouldn't mind if we looked around. He has nothing to hide anyway." "Right, brother." Caleb felt the weight of the moment weigh down on him. 12 lives hidden under the wooden floor of his barn. One word from him could save them or condemn them. And looking into Blackwood's eyes, he knew exactly what kind of correction awaited those girls if they were found. But there was something else in the pastor's expression. Something that told Caleb that this man had never been challenged by someone who did not fear his authority, never been forced to back down from a confrontation he could not control through threats or religious manipulation. "Actually," Caleb said, raising his rifle slightly, "I do mind. This is my land, and you are not welcome here." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain hitting the ground, and the 4 men realized that their night had just become much more complicated than they had expected. Blackwood's face changed. The mask of righteous concern slipped away, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. His men shifted in their saddles, hands reaching for their weapons. Mr. Thornfield, Blackwood's voice took on a new tone. I think you misunderstood the situation. Those girls are my property by the law of God and the law of the land. Concealing them would make you an accomplice to theft. Stealing. Caleb's laughter was shrill. You're talking about your daughters like they're cattle. Children belong to their parents until marriage transfers that right to their husbands. That is biblical law. Blackwood went one step further. His men spread out a little behind him. Surely even a man who has abandoned civilization understands the basic principles of morality. Caleb studies the location. 4 armed men against 1. Low odds. But he faced worse. More importantly, he could see something in Blackwood's eyes that the priest probably didn't realize he was expressing. Despair. This is not just about bringing bad girls home. It's about maintaining control over something that's slipping away. Biblical law. Caleb repeated, is that what you call selling girls to men old enough to be their grandfathers? Blackwood's composure completely shattered. How dare you doubt? I've heard the story. Caleb continued, his voice cutting through the storm. Of his holy marriages, of the money that changed hands, of wives who disappeared in the night and were buried without question. One of Blackwood's men, a scarred man with worried eyes, shifted uncomfortably. That told Caleb something important. Not all of the pastor's followers were completely convinced of his righteousness. You are listening to lies spread by enemies of the church. Blackwood growled, I provide good Christian homes for my daughters. If you have corrupted them by your godless influence, they came here alone, Caleb said, fleeing something that scared them more than dying in a storm. Makes a man wonder what kind of father would inspire that level of fear. Blackwood's hand moved to his coat, where Caleb could see the outline of a pistol. You have no right to judge my method. I do God's work in a godless land. God's work. Caleb shook his head. You know what I think? I think he is just a man who found a way to make money by calling his cruelty holy. And I think those girls finally got tired of pretending he was anything more than a bully with a Bible. The words hit the mark. Blackwood's face was red with anger, and his hand clenched around the butt of his pistol. But before he could draw his gun, Caleb's rifle swung with practiced precision. The gun barrel was pointed straight at the pastor's chest. Here's what happens, Caleb said, his voice deadly calm. You will get back on your horses and leave. You will stop looking for those girls, and you will find yourself a new job that does not involve terrorizing children. Blackwood's eyes burned with anger. But he was smart enough to recognize a man who had killed once and would not hesitate to do so again. This isn't over, he whispered. Yes, Caleb replied. It's over. In that moment, 4 armed men faced a single man on the muddy field. The rain pouring between them, Caleb could see the calculation in Blackwood's eyes, weighing his power against the very real threat of a rifle barrel aimed at his heart. The man with the scar spoke first, his voice strained with uncertainty. Pastor, perhaps we should... Silent. Blackwood's command came like a crack of a whip, but his eyes never left Caleb's face. This guy thinks he can go against God's will. He thought his isolation made him untouchable. What I think, Caleb said, his rifle steady despite the storm, is that you've been pushing people around for so long that you've forgotten what happens when someone fights back. Blackwood's smile returned, cold and predatory. You are right about one thing, Thornfield. I built something in this territory. Church, followers, influence. Do you really think a bitter hermit can resist all that? I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. The confrontation might have continued. But the sound of splintering wood interrupted the confrontation. A screen had blown off Caleb's cabin window, banging against the wall with every gust of wind. The noise seemed to break whatever magic had kept the moment frozen. Blackwood slowly raised his hand, palm facing out in a mock peace gesture. Okay, we'll retreat now. But understand this, those girls belong to me. By law, by custom, by divine right, you can't protect them forever. I don't need forever. Just long enough Long enough for what? Caleb's smile was strained. Long enough for word to spread about who he really was, about what he did to those girls, about how the great Reverend Blackwood was confronted by a man with a rifle that was on target. Caleb could see it in the way Blackwood's jaw tightened and the glances his men exchanged. Reputation is everything to a man like this. Challenge his power openly, and his entire empire of fear and manipulation will begin to crumble. Do you think people would believe an atheist hermit over a man of God? I think people are not as stupid as you believe. They saw the girls he married off. They noticed how young they looked, how scared they were. They wondered about the money flowing into his church and where it really went. Caleb stepped forward, his rifle still aimed at Blackwood's chest. All they need is someone to tell the truth. Blackwood mounted his horse with stiff dignity, but Caleb could feel the anger radiating from him like heat from a forge. This is not over yet. Men like Blackwood do not simply accept defeat and walk away. They regrouped. They planned, and they returned with overwhelming force. Enjoy your victory. Thornfield, Blackwood called as he turned his horse. But remember, I know where you live. I know you're alone here. And I know exactly how far away the nearest help is in this desolate place. The four horsemen disappeared into the storm, their lanterns fading until only the sound of their hooves could be heard. Then even that sound was swallowed up by the wind and rains. Caleb stood in his yard long after they left, letting the cold rain soak into his clothes while his mind raced with possibilities. Blackwood will be back. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow. But he'll be back with more people and less conscience about killing anyone who gets in his way. The question is whether Caleb cares enough to 12 frightened girls to face whatever the pastor will bring next. As if summoned by his thought, Grace's voice called softly from the barn. Are they gone yet? Caleb turned toward the barn, water dripping from the brim of his hat. For now, Grace stepped out of the shadows. Followed by her 11 sisters, they looked like ghosts in the lantern light, pale, trembling, but alive. The youngest sister was still crying silently. And Martha kept glancing out at the road as if expecting the knights to return at any moment. He'll be back, Grace said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, with more people. Caleb walked past them toward his cabin. Come inside. We need to talk. Simple wooden house. A single room with a stone fireplace. A rough wooden table and nothing more. Caleb lit the fire as the sisters huddled together, their wet clothes steaming in the sudden warmth. You can't stay here, he said bluntly. Blackwood won't give up, and this place is too isolated to defend against a large group. Grace nodded, though her face was tense with worry. Where can we go? He has influence throughout the territory. Other pastors, police, politicians, all owed him favors or feared his power. Caleb stared into the fire, thinking. Then he turned to face them, and Grace saw something in his face that she hadn't seen before. Determination mixed with something that could be hope. There is a settlement 3 days' ride north, across the territorial boundary into federal jurisdiction. Blackwood's influence did not reach that far. He paused, studying their faces. But it's a difficult journey, and there's no guarantee what you'll find when you get there. It has to be better than what we're leaving behind, Martha said. Caleb nodded slowly. I'll take you there. We leave at dawn. Grace stared at him. Why? Why would you risk your life for strangers? The question hung in the air like smoke. Caleb was silent for so long that Grace thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I had a daughter, about her age. He gestured toward one of the sisters in the middle. When the fever took my little girl and my wife, I thought my life was over. I came here to die quietly, away from anything that reminds me of them. He looked up at Grace, and she saw 15 years of pain in his eyes. But looking at you tonight, seeing you protect your sisters, like my Sarah protected her little cousins. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I can still do something good before I leave. The storm finally passed. Through the window, Grace could see the first faint rays of dawn touching the eastern sky. In a few hours, they will embark on the most dangerous journey of their lives. But for the first time since running away from her father's house, she felt something like hope. Caleb Thornfield has lived alone for 15 years, believing that the world has nothing more to offer him. But his 12 desperate daughters reminded him that sometimes the most important battles are not those fought for themselves, but for those who cannot fight for themselves. And sometimes saving others is the only way to save yourself.